we move slow, where we move slow. To the sound. Feel like the heart in the sky. Moving on to the sound.
Hello, Detroit and the world. Welcome to a special episode of Authentically Detroit, broadcasting live from the Audio Wave Network studios on the Lower East Side here in the city, powered by the East Side Community Network and sponsored by none other than the Ford Foundation, a content partner to BridgeDetroit.com. I'm Orlando Bailey.
And I'm Donna Gibbons-Davidson.
Thank you for listening in and supporting our efforts to build a platform of authentic voices for real people on the East Side of Detroit. We want you to like, rate, and subscribe to our podcast on all platforms. We drop a new episode every week, so be sure to turn on those notifications. Mayor Mike Duggan has announced a new director of planning and development in the city of Detroit that was confirmed by the Detroit City Council just today, around noon today. His name is Antoine Bryant. He hails all the way from Houston, Texas, with a wide cadre of experiences. He brings academic acclaim and scholarship from the University of Texas and Cornell University. He serves on many national boards and affinity groups, and we are happy to bring him to you, our listeners. Antoine, welcome to Authentically Detroit.
Thank you, Orlando. I greatly appreciate the opportunity.
We are so excited to have you. Also joining us is a person that our listeners know very well because we call his name on this show almost every single week. Chase Cantrell is the executive director of Building Community Value, a local commercial real estate developer, policy wonk, and a recovering attorney. Chase, welcome back to Authentically Detroit.
It is good to be back. You know, when Donna said last week,
we're so privileged to have you here.
She wanted me back. So I said, okay,
Yes.
This week, here I am.
Well, see, this is what we do, Chase. Either you can come here and speak for yourself. We're going to talk about you.
Either way, huh?
So,
You know, he sent me a note the other day. He was like, y'all ringing, my name came up again on the podcast.
It's
like,
keep on coming up.
Just come on.
No, that's what happens.
Just come on. We had to have Antoine come on for Chase to agree to come on. Listen, so we have Antoine for about an hour, and we're excited to dig into what we hope will be a very rich discussion. So there's no fresh off the press segment this week. So we are getting right down to business. Antoine, you're in the hot seat. Tell us just a little bit about yourself. What should we know about you that we don't know already?
So I am not 57 years old.
Okay. Somebody told you were 57?
It's a bit of a joke. There's been a number of press releases that were announcing this opportunity.
Yeah.
And some were official and some were less so. And, one of them said he's this veteran of urban development and is 57 years old. And most of my colleagues and family who know I'm not 57 years old, but some of them were concerned. I mean, I've been lying all this time. And so especially the ones that were wondering, but ain't your baby 9 years old? How are you 57?
Well, listen, 57 is a good age. I'm going to speak up for 57. 57 is a good age, and I'm going to miss it in September. I just want you to know.
I'm just not in a rush. That's all I'm saying.
I hear you. I hear you. But when you get here, it's a good age.
It's a wonderful age. I look forward to it.
Yeah,
Hopefully I get there.
they were just predicting the future. That's
I
all.
like that. We're going to go with that. Predicting the future. Glad to be here. Native of Brooklyn, New York.
Oh, okay. I was just in BK this past weekend.
I knew you was good.
Yeah.
I knew you was good. No, it's grew up in New York City housing. I was in the projects.
Wow.
In the 70s and 80s. And so, that's where I got kind of my understanding of what quote unquote the urban environment was. And then what it was interesting, I remember telling my dad when I was 10, I was asking him, how do we change where we live? The typical 10-year-old kid trying to understand the world. And he says, you want to do architecture, right? And I didn't know what that was. I was 10. And he had the opportunity to introduce me to a black architect in Brooklyn who was doing affordable housing. And he took me under his wing. We did the whole, what do you want to be when you grow up exercise in 5th grade? And I did a solar home model with me and my friend Kenyatta. And fast forward, got into a great high school, allowed me to get to Cornell, started architecture there, realized that didn't really talk about how cities form. And that's when I was introduced to urban planning, which looked at the socioeconomic status of it, looked at the psychology of neighborhoods, looked at the economic status of neighborhoods, looked at the history of urban environments. Much of the work that many people became familiar with a couple of years ago with The Color of Law. Yeah. I studied back in the early 90s, right? And so when that book came out 2 years ago, people were like, oh my God, redlining is a thing. And I'm like, no, this ain't no surprise. I've been here for a while, right? And so I was fascinated that it actually became something recently But that fostered my desire to want to directly work in communities, especially ones that are underserved, like the one I grew up in. Finished with my undergrad in planning, wanted to still design, which is what led me to go get my master's in architecture, went to University of Texas, and have been involved in community development, affordable housing design, and community engagement since the late 90s.
So when you say for the urban planning part that you were studying in the 90s, was that part of your curriculum? Because we know urban planning isn't always terribly representative, or were you just finding that information out on your own somewhere?
Great question. No, our school is the Department of Architecture, Art, and Planning.
Mhm.
And when I was accepted to the department in architecture, I had no idea what planning was. Right. I mean, and many people don't. Right. And I think that's fair to say. The Joe public is not necessarily understanding of what planning is, but even more importantly, how much it can affect. And I learned that once I started taking a couple courses as a freshman. I transferred my major as a sophomore, got totally inculcated into planning, but also, as you were alluding to, realized how uninclusive it is as a discipline and as a reality. So.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that it's important to understand how urban planning is uninclusive, but I think there are people who will question whether the way urban planning is structured is also racist or also
colonial practice.
Practices. Are you really studying inclusion, or are you studying ways to redevelop communities, and to what extent is redevelopment synonymous with displacement? You're from Brooklyn, and I was in Brooklyn last year.
It was a much different Brooklyn.
It's a much different place, and people, oh wow, New York has improved, Brooklyn has improved, and it's certainly more beautiful now. But
That's debatable.
Well, I mean, I'm just saying, whenever you have brand new buildings, whenever you replace things that could not afford to be maintained a certain way with, money, you're going to change the aesthetic in such a way that is attractive to visitors. How about that? But the culture also gets erased, and certain people get pushed out. And New York is, to me, a textbook example of where that's happening. So how do you use your role in urban planning to stop that?
So, no, it's a great question. And it's funny. You hate to be the person that says, did you read this other book? It's great. But there's an interesting.
I read a lot of books.
That's us. We're all. So you're in good company because that's us all day.
Sometimes it gets annoying. People are like, can you just talk, bro? No, but I think it's so. As a native New Yorker, I mean, my mom's still there, my dad's still there, I have siblings there. I actually just got back 2 weeks ago for seeing my family for the first time since before COVID. So I got to spend some time there. And the thing that grieved me about it is not the same Brooklyn it was when I grew up. It's actually far different. What I would argue, the differences that you see in New York City are entirely born by a desire for green, quite frankly. It was market driven. Much of the changes in New York City and Brooklyn specifically were market driven and wholly exclusive of the culture and of the residents that are there, right? And so that's much of what you've seen across many cities that were changing rapidly by gentrification and other items. However, there have been opportunities where Black culture can be kept when you focus and maximize the voice of the residents of that area, right? We've been successful with, prior to my coming here, we've had a lot of engagement in parts of Houston. Years ago, and you're seeing a rapid accent right now, there's been a lot of success in parts of West Oakland, right? There's been some success in East Oakland. Now, there's been some failures there as well. But I think what I've found is that the success has almost inextricably been linked to the ability of a planning department and or the community itself to being a part of that culture. It's one of the things that I talked about earlier in a different conversation, that one of my goals will be to engage every neighborhood. I know that that's something that has not happened as of yet, but it's something that I've talked about extensively when I was interviewing for this process, and what I've shared with our staff for the 9.5 days I've been in the office, and for the 2 hours I've been official, right, is that we're going to aggressively engage our populace all across the city. Not just the ones that we're currently active in, but also for the ones we're targeting moving forward.
Can you define engagement for us?
It's a great question. Well, do you want engagement pre or post COVID?
I want your engagement philosophy. I would like to know how you define the purpose of engagement and the process of engagement, understanding that it looks a lot different when you're virtual than when you're actually face to face?
More than fair. Well, first of all, it's funny. When I was in Houston, I had to transition our Metro, which is our transportation agency, to go from engagement to outreach. Right? They had a whole community outreach department, and they didn't understand when I was like, that just is one way. Like outreach is just one way. You do realize if you want a communication, you have to have a dialogue, which means it's two-way. And I was like, rhema word. That was like some kind of super. They were like, really? And I was like, yeah, you have to have both ways. But if I'm defining engagement, I think it's active listening. Like you got to listen. You have to listen, and you have to listen as comprehensively as possible, as actively as possible. I've lectured college courses, principally in architecture, and that's one called "Shut Up," right? Because architects are taught to talk and talk and talk and talk, and I got the right idea and don't listen enough. And so when I define engagement, it's critically listening, it's asking the right questions, but making sure you're also not only cross-cultural, but also intergenerational, right? I think it's important that we're not just talking to people that are essentially 25 to 44, but we have to actively engage our seniors, but also actively engage Gen Z, right? The person that's 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, don't be here longer than me. Right. And so it's important that we are able to not only gauge what they're looking forward to seeing, but being sure that they're being heard.
Okay, so I just have one more question to follow up on that. You're in an organization that's been around for 37 years, right? And so we've been engaging the community. That's actually one of the things that we were founded for. And I'm wondering, what role do you see organizations like mine? I'm not just talking about block clubs, neighborhood associations, organizations with no power and money. I'm talking about organizations like mine that are actually involved in trying to create real community change. How do you see engaging us as part of that process?
Well, in the best case scenario, I would like for it to be as collaborative as possible. I never came in and y'all can check the records or what have you. I never came in saying I got everything figured out. I know everything. I know I don't know most of everything that has to do here. And so I've found success by engaging the people that know and that have been here. So I would like to think that it would be as collaborative. In many respects, there are skill sets and, technical graphs and paperwork and drawings that we can bring. But as far as engagement, that's something that y'all can bring. And
we got pictures and drawings too.
Yeah.
And graphs.
Not debating that whatsoever. So, but as far as, making sure that it is two-way, but also that I have absolutely no problem with organizations like yours and others taking the lead and introducing me to who we need to speak to and making sure that our staff is where they need to be.
Because we have... Go on, and I'll let you go on.
Yeah, I just like how you're talking, and you're talking good, and I want to have, go in further on the engagement philosophy conversation. But I want to talk to you first before we get further down that rabbit hole into why Detroit. Right. What was it about Detroit that brought you here, that made you want to interview, and that you're now our director? Why this city?
It's a great question. It's funny. The first person I met from Detroit that I've known and has become a dear friend and sister of mine is Tiffany Brown. I think I might have.
Oh, yes.
We love Tiffany.
We love Tiffany here.
Tiffany's
yes.
I've known Tiffany probably 15, 16 years.
Yeah,
and,
she's amazing.
We're in the same organization, National Organization of Minority Architects. And so we met under the auspices of that. And we met probably the same way everybody meets, trash talking about whose city the best city, right? And so, but she was fervent about Detroit is absolutely the best place ever. And so, I was like, okay, whatever, everybody says that. But then as we got to know each other, and she said, you need to come down and visit. And so I came here for some conference. And you know how typically you go to a conference, you go whatever little hotel, you go get dinner someplace, and then you fly out. You don't never actually see anything. But I was in Detroit. I was like, Tiff, take me around. And that's the way I've always been, sometimes much to the amusement of my wife. But she took me around. And what I saw and what I experienced was love, energy, drive, and an intense desire to forward the city, right? And so none of the narrative that you hear about Detroit, right? The narrative that we've, from an outside, you hear that it's been challenged and that the automobile industry has left and that, there's vacant land and all that kind of stuff that everyone's familiar with. She introduced me to entrepreneurship and power and culture and excitement. And so those are things that I always resonated with me about Detroit. And so I've been here probably a dozen times prior to this interview process, and all of that was consistent in light of all the other challenges that we have heard. And so I had the opportunity to come here a couple of times. It wasn't the best time for my family. It wasn't necessarily the best opportunity for me to come. But when I got a call about 2 months ago, and they laid out kind of the direction that Detroit was heading, and the kind of role that they were looking for, and that they really wanted someone that was serious about engagement in addition to planning, they looked like this the best opportunity and the best time to come.
So Detroit has a very, very diverse and rich history, like every city, right?
Yep.
But, one of the things that we push around here in my neighborhood in Jeff Chalmers is this concept that Black Detroit matters, right?
Okay.
There's signs that say Black Detroit matters. We've been here since 1920 in my family on both sides. So somehow we ended up here running from somebody and ended up in the city of Detroit and found opportunity. But there's been a whole power base that was built here. The 1967, they call it riot, we call it rebellion. In 1967, when the rebellion happened, after that, a lot of people thought Detroit went downhill. But if you're a Black Detroiter, that's when the good stuff started, right? All of a sudden, you started occupying positions of political power. You could move to any neighborhood. You live this life. I always call it Eatonville, because it really, Zora Neale Hurston spoke of her home as Eatonville growing up in Florida. And certainly that's what it feels like here. It feels like Valhalla, it was great. And so we're proud of it. And yet when people talk about that time period, a lot of outsiders will look at that as the time period where Detroit started to decline. And so now we have a new administration, several new administrations that have happened since Coleman Young. And the question for a lot of Detroiters is, how do we preserve those things that our ancestors fought to make happen while at the same time moving forward? Because, time doesn't stand still. Mm-hmm. But how do you preserve the essence of the Detroit that I grew up in and so many of my peers grew up in? And it was all different Detroits because Detroit is very diverse, but there was a Detroit spirit that we loved. How do you preserve that?
That's a great question. So one of the things I think is that I'm focusing on, and you'll hear me talk about, is that I encourage these opportunities to meet with community groups, to meet with entities like yourselves, to have these conversations, primarily because every one of the residents need to be leading that charge, right? If we're looking to move forward for native Detroiters, I think that's one of the things that they have to be at the forefront. It's interesting. When I was, the question I got several times during my process, including by the mayor, was how do you see growth in Detroit? And I told him, look, the easy way that cities typically grow is they'll get young professionals and they'll get the art class and they'll get the cultural class. I mean, that's kind of the, rinse repeat kind of approach. But what I told him, I was like, you have a fervent core of residents that have been here, that have been through all the thick and thin, that have been through everything. And all the ones that may have left usually are related to the people that's there. And all they want is a reason and an opportunity to come back.
JT, where's that applause button?
JT, I want to ask you about that because you talked about the people who stayed through thick and thin, and there are people, quite honestly, who are still here who have not met a planner in the city of Detroit's planning department, who have not been engaged. They're outside of a strategic neighborhood funding area. And I hear you say that you want to engage and listen, and hopefully that leads to some sort of resident-led implementation as well. But how do you foresee combating or listening to residents, number one, who pissed, who got a gripe with you and don't know you, who's traumatized because of the loss of democracy in this city, and who, quite frankly, feels like the investment that is happening all in through and around the city, especially our downtown and midtown core, isn't for them?
Okay. It's a great question. So first of all, I have a thick skin. So, I fully expect people to be mad. And for some, quite frankly, a bunch of people deserve to be mad, right? Have every right to be upset. Yeah. But I'm still going in because, Ms. Jackson and Mr. White deserve to be heard and have to be heard. And so we have to go in. And so I'll go in. I will let everyone, if they need to pile on, they can pile on me. That's not going to scare me. I'm still going to be there, right? So once we get past the fact that they've never met somebody, now they have. And they're not only going to meet the staff, but they will have the chance to meet the director, right? So now I got you. You can say everything you need to say. Then once we get past that, then it's going to be imperative that we begin to talk about, okay, what kind of steps can we do next, right? Knowing that it's an iterative process, right? So the SNFs right now we have 10 of them. They comprise approximately 38, 39 neighborhoods in and of themselves. There are 100 neighborhoods or so that we have not addressed, right? For a variety of reasons. We may have met with them, but we don't have a process in place necessarily for them. And so it'll be incumbent that I meet with them and make sure that I get to hear from them. Then as far as making sure that they're part of the process, and I'm glad you brought up the word trauma because that's exactly it. We definitely have residents at various age groups and quite frankly, even various economic backgrounds that have dealt with disinvestment, have dealt with neglect. And we have to just acknowledge that and say, okay, now that we acknowledge it, let's move forward. You can't do anything until you acknowledge it at the front end. And so we want to make sure that it's heard and understood and that we will be able to proceed once we engage.
Okay.
What happens after the engagement though? So I've seen city staff struggle with this at times, right? Like you do the listening and some are very sincere, right? Like you go into a neighborhood, you talk to residents, great folks, right? Who mean well and who want to do good work, but we have limited resources, right? We're a really big city with a population that still hasn't stabilized. So you do the listening. Sometimes that feels extractive, but you do the listening. You realize that you can't necessarily do the things that residents want immediately. Do you then go back or do you just move on to the next neighborhood? Like, what does that process look like? Because Detroit is big.
No, Detroit is very big. But what I would argue is that part of that will be, we have to understand, we have to listen, but then we have to stratify, the priorities. And we have to be honest about that, right? Because the resources are finite. Now, one thing that I can know, and Chase, you probably know even better than I do, there have been other entities that are looking to partner, that are looking to invest. Right? Both philanthropic, both private, both within and without. And so I think one of the things that we've shared initially, and I've had some very, very early conversations, is that if we're going to partner, then we need to partner equitably. And we need to understand that, right? Many of the entities that have voiced a desire to partner have said that they are open and look to partner outside of the 7.2, right? They know that development needs to happen inclusively, it needs to happen equitably, it needs to happen outside of that. They want to know the right way to do that, right? Not everybody's on the same page. We acknowledge that. But I think if we can begin to show traction, begin to show that this can be an equitable partnership that will value the residents outside of 7.2, then all Detroit wins. And that's the message that I'm trying to share.
Well, because I think that, in some neighborhoods, for example, people have been trying to get homes. And those homes have been committed to another developer and they have longstanding rights. And that creates an issue. In other neighborhoods, people want to do affordable housing.
Donna,
I'm sorry.
You ought to be ashamed of yourself,
I really
Donna.
should. But you know
this
what?
This is your show.
But you know what? My phone is on silent. My computer's not. And my computer was the one that was ringing.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Yes, listen to him. In other neighborhoods, people want to do affordable housing. And you can't do affordable housing with city support in many neighborhoods unless you're an SNF neighborhood by city policy. And so while conversation is good and it's great to get to know people, how do we look at making sure that what the city is doing is addressing the needs of everybody, knowing there's limited resources, but also knowing that there's sometimes organizations that can do the work? So I'll give an example. Let's say I want to do a housing development outside of an SNF. I'm not asking the city for any money. I want to go and get a low-income housing tax credit, and I know those resources are limited. We just had a whole bunch of them approved in a very limited space, in a very limited geography, because that's what's allowed. And so if I want to go out, I get foundation money, I get whatever kind of private resources and apply to do something in my neighborhood. Is that possible? Or is there the statement, no, that can't happen here because it's not strategic for the city to invest in your neighborhood at this time?
So let me make sure I understand you clearly. You're stating that you have a desire, hypothetically, to do an affordable housing development in neighborhood X that may or may not be outside of the SNF.
It's outside of the SNF.
Okay. And then your question would be, are you allowed to do so?
Well, not at this time.
Okay. Well, we need to look at that.
Thank you.
That's a fair, So, like I said, I don't have every answer. I'm official 2.5 hours.
I understand.
But I think that's one of the things that I talked about previously, and I'm a firm believer of because I was a nonprofit developer for a part of my career, is that oftentimes there are things that our nonprofit developers and others like-minded entities can do that the city of X can't do for a number of reasons. And so, you have to be understanding and beholden to that and allow those entities to have the wherewithal to do so. Now, I don't know all the history of what would happen before, but I do think it's something that we need to examine because at the end of the day, if we can get housing on the ground, ultimately Detroit wins.
Yeah, I mean, I only want to move forward. I don't want to go back and relitigate the past, but I only want to move forward. And what I think is if the city were to say to organizations like mine, here are the criteria for the neighborhoods in which you can do development. Okay. Some of those neighborhoods may be SNF neighborhoods, some of them may not. But if the criteria are the criteria that you put the burden on me to lift up, then I can either live up to them or not. I think the challenge is when there's no criteria that the community has any involvement in either setting or documenting, that it feels like there's power beyond me. And so it would be a good process for us to at least move forward with an understanding, how do we do work inside of the community, understanding that if you're not investing in neighborhoods, like many of the neighborhoods in Detroit, they are not staying the same. They're getting worse. And that's been documented. You want to talk about books. What is the Alan Wallach's book, Divided City? Mm-hmm. Speaks to that, great book. Right? It speaks to that. And there's the data right here that some neighborhoods get worse simply because, things development neighborhoods require some source of income or resources to go in there.
What I can commit to you is that we can continue that conversation. I think developing criteria is something that can help with everybody. And so that's something we can continue to talk about.
It sounds wonderful.
All of the SNF planning studies are complete, I think. What's next?
Great question.
I'm a journalist.
No.
Well, there is one neighborhood that Fiat Chrysler, Stellantis, when you pulled in here, you saw an automotive plant. That was the Stellantis plant that got expanded. And by the way, we love help, building some type of barrier between us and Stellantis, so we don't have to look at a factory every time we get in our cars. That's another story. But anyway, that's Stellantis. And one of the things that was agreed to was that there was going to be a study in this neighborhood. And Arthur Jemison agreed that before he left Detroit, that he was going to work with us and look at the plans that ECN has already developed in doing planning in this neighborhood. And that planning is really important because once that plan is done, that will trigger the funds that that Fiat Chrysler, now Stellantis, invested in in some type of development fund to go to the community. So that's a plan. Hopefully it's on a short list. I know you have a whole lot of things, but we'd love to see that get moving.
That's fair. That's great.
So I love this conversation because part of it is there's the development that feels like it's happening to us, right, in a lot of our neighborhoods. But also, Donna was talking about, community development organizations that are doing development. But what is, in a Black city like Detroit, what does it look like to create a pipeline of Black developers? Is there something that the city can do to actually assist that? Because right now, what we see with a lot of the large developers, they don't reflect the demographics of the city. Is that a priority?
So, yeah, I talked about this previously. I think that allowing for the room for Black developers to grow, especially, ones that either have a relationship or from here, is going to be incredibly important, if only because the relationship and the desire to make Detroit better is the motivation is different, right? If you are developer A, that is a nationally recognized, publicly traded entity, you are beholden to your shareholders and to your bottom line. And, you hope to do a good development, but ultimately you really want to, do something that's going to be productive financially. In my experience, when you're able to adequately partner with developers that are either homegrown and or have a very rich cultural relationship, i.e. a Black developer in a Black city, it's going to lead to that much more of a fruitful relationship and result. And so one of the things I think is going to be incredibly important is allowing us to grow with and through our local developer base.
Do you foresee the planning department having a role in the redress for Black homeowners who lost their homes due to the overtaxation?
Great question. That one's a little different because some of that, even though I understand all of it, some of it's kind of outside of our purview, right? One of the things that I talked about during this process was that how our departments need to be much more collaborative, right? And so we're looking, okay, as probably most of you know, planning and HRD used to be one department. Now we work kind of together as two partnering entities. How do we work with, directly with the mayor office, with the administration? We're all going to be working together. I think some of the taxation issues, which are terrible and have been a tremendous blight on many households in this area, we can provide a lot of data, a lot of insight. I think our authority is extremely limited in that regard. But what we can do is help inform the argument about why it's damaging. And so that's something that we can commit to.
Awesome. So one of the to my question about what was next after the SNF planning study, because I don't know, I don't remember if I got an answer or not, but
you did.
Okay, we'll move on.
And I'll get you one, I promise.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. I heard you on a colleague's show, Stephen Henderson. He's a colleague of ours on Detroit Today. Talk about looking at updating the master plan and wanting to look at that within the next year. What does that look like in practicum for you, man?
Well, no, that's where I was going. I mean, one of the things, for the life cycle of a plan typically is 5 years, 7 years, right? If it gets to 10, it gets a little long in the tooth, quite frankly, if only because the market forces will change a city outside of the plan, right? The last master plan here for the city of Detroit was from 2009, right? And so by typical urban planning rubric, it would be a little lengthy, right? And I think everyone in this room could agree that this city has changed, just a bit since 2009. But there's a lot of things that go into the preparation and even the gearing up for a master plan. And so that's something that I definitely want to do. That's something that I think would be important. But I do know that there's a number of things that need to happen prior to that. So that's why I've been saying it's something I want to focus on, but I can't, commit to it on day 6. Right.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So that's something that I think is going to be important.
On day 6.
But
check back on day
hey,
10.
Maybe about day 12.
They ain't got you out doing media interviews. We got to ask the questions,
it's
right?
It's a more than fair question. But and it's a fair question for any planning director, right?
Of course.
So I get it. And what I can tell you is that the staff is excited about something like that, because it goes into the heart of what we do academically and even professionally. But also you get to really have the opportunity, going back to Chase and Donna's assertions earlier, to not only activate the engagement process, but to critically come up with community-driven solutions at the end of it as well. So it is something that's incredibly exciting, but there's a couple of T's I got to cross and I's I got to dot before I can say we're going to jump out and do it.
We'll keep in contact.
I know.
So
I'll probably see you at the restaurant.
But next time, send me an invitation. Because that black pasta is anyway.
Man.
No, listen. Welcome to Detroit is flooding, right? And so I know that Dan is, so many of us and our communities have been so impacted by flooding, and it reminds us that climate change won't wait for us to get interested. So how do we incorporate sustainability into the planning process? I know people say, well, the only thing you can do is separate the sewer systems. But in fact, there are other things. There's green infrastructure that's possible inside of neighborhoods. And there are other design practices that can be brought forth. And one of my questions also is, for example, I believe that when Little Caesars Arena was built, it was given an exception, I can't think of the term for that, for some of the green investments they needed to make. So they put a lot of concrete down without addressing the stormwater drainage. In this community, there was the big retention pond that Stellantis built. They call it the Lake Beneteau. And that's cool, but you still have a lot of concrete that's being put down based on a new trucking center on Jefferson. And so it seems as though sustainability seems to be still an afterthought in some of the development projects here. How do we bring sustainable design more fully front and center into the process? I
know you got this one because you out of Houston, all that. Y'all get hurricanes.
I've seen a flood or two, right? No, Donna, I'm glad you brought that up. One of the things I've shared with our team is that and I said I didn't bring the floods, I promise. But it was, we understand that climate change is a thing. You can't put that genie back in the bottle. It's definitely happening. We're having climate issues faster, and they're more severe. And so that's not going to change. And so as a result, resiliency has to be a part of the lexicon, both from a planning and from a design standpoint, as well as implementation, right? And that's juxtaposed with a city that has a lot of concrete, right? I mean, it's just a reality, right? And so you cannot absorb the water nearly as fast as you would like to. So there's a couple of ways to look at it. First of all, from a purely infrastructure standpoint, we do have some aged infrastructure, right? So that's, we just have to acknowledge that, and we have to talk about what that means and how we have to address that in and of itself. Then moving forward, it's been something I served on our planning commission at the city of Houston for almost a dozen years. My tenure ended last week. And one of the things we had to make as a part of our development rubric was the replacement of, things like green spaces, the changes of retentions, the necessities for all developments, both large and small. And I think that's something that you just have to marry with your development standards if you want to mitigate the effects of flooding moving forward. I heard way too many stories, both personally and on council, about seniors and others, literally having flooded out basements, not once but twice, because they got affected both times, that the floods happened. And we can't allow that to continue. We have to be able to be aggressive about this. And one of the things that I think is important, and why, planning has said we'd love to work with our departments as much as we possibly can, is that it has to be a very collaborative and forward-thinking approach, right? It can't just be addressing what we have now, but also how are we going to address this in the future? And there's no time like the present to really have that conversation.
Okay.
I like how you're talking. I want to ask you about young folks, because you talked about young folks a little bit earlier. And oftentimes when we are talking about planning and development for cities, I think most of the time we're planning and developing cities for old people. And young folks are often tokenized or an afterthought. What is your position or thought process around engaging and implementing the vision that young people have for where they live and where they want to live?
Orlando, I'm really glad you asked that, because I have a friend, his name is Prescott. He's an architect and planner in Oakland, and he's made engaging youth like his thing. Like, he don't even talk to you if you're above 21 years old, right? He really does engage teens and preteens and makes them part of design, part of planning projects he does. And one of the things we talk about is, you go to middle schools, you go to high schools and tell them what planning is, tell them what architecture is. Most middle school students, black, white, green, have never met an architect.
Yeah.
I know. And damn sure haven't met, excuse me, I'm so sorry. Have never met an urban.
Oh, you're free.
Apologies.
No, you're free.
Okay. Have never
We just
met.
put a parental consent thing on here.
Have never met an urban planner.
Yeah.
Right. And nor do they have even the appreciation of how many sectors it touches. And so it's everything from having them come, I've done things where we had them come to our office. I don't know I have to figure out the rules here, but, I've done that before. The going to the schools to tell them what urban planning is. And what you find, and no surprise in this room, is that your 14-year-olds, your 13-year-olds are much more savvy than we probably give them credit for. And so they can provide in tremendous insight that things you wouldn't even be thinking about. And it's, my son's 13. So I have a living lab right in my own house. And he understands what I do, but he also asks introspective questions that invariably me, as someone that's 47, won't think about. And so I think it's incredibly important that we engage our youth, because they're going to give an insight that we don't have. But also, like I said earlier, they're going to, unfortunately or fortunately, reap the benefits or the failures of the decisions that we make.
That's Tiffany Brown's story, right? She's one of 400 some odd Black women architects.
It's now 508.
Yeah. And so can you talk a little bit more about that? Because to Chase's point around like building a bench and creating new dreams in young people by exposing them to something they've never been exposed to, mentorship, exposing young Black folks, to the field, partnering with organizations to do that, like all of the things.
It's what I'm excited to say is that there are definitely more resources now than there were when I was in school. But we have a lot of work to do, right? So, Tiffany has a great program, 400 Forward, where she's determined to expose architecture to little Black girls all across the country, right? Because, there were, at the time when she first started, it was in the late 400s. Now I think it's 508, 510. She could tell you definitively. But there's another young woman who did this discussion about more people have been to space than there are licensed Black women architects, right? Just, that just let that marinate for a while, right? So, and that's ever. That ain't just right now. That's like ever. But then there are other organizations that we're partnering with. Like I said, I'm with NOMA, National Organization of Minority Architects, and we have something called Project Pipeline, which is definitively focused on exposing young Black and brown kids to architecture through summer camps. And we just did it about 2 weeks ago, and it's all across the country. As a matter of fact, since I got a small platform here with y'all, if y'all don't mind me, a 30-second commercial. NOMA's 50th anniversary will be here in Detroit because it was founded 50 years ago by 12 Black architects here in Detroit in 1971. And so, we were planning a huge blowout blast conference that, Auntie Rona came and kind of rained on a little bit, but we are still going to be here and have about 600 people.
Was Howard Sims one of those founders?
Oh, there's a backstory.
There is.
What is some breaking news? You got the breaking news right here.
It's not really breaking news,
Okay,
but my dad and Howard Sims were best friends.
Well, look at that.
And so my dad went to U of M's medical school, and Howard went to U of M's architecture school. And my dad loaned him his first $10,000 to start his business. And there used to be a joke, who would pay for Black architects? But I want to go back to Detroit, right?
Well, that's not still a joke.
Detroit. But who paid? Well, but now there's in when they graduated from college, there was no money in architecture.
That's a whole longer conversation.
There was no money in our community. But, one of the things that, again, was interesting is that under Coleman Young, Black architects did quite well. And so he created a pathways for Black architects. My husband works for the Charles Wright Museum of African American History, and Sims Farner designed that museum. And there's so many places in our community that they designed. My question is, what role does the city play in deciding on who they're going to contract with and who they're going to, empower, going back to what Chase has said, because there was a minute here, and I'm not speaking for other folks, where some local architects were finding it hard to get business in the city of Detroit. And we're saying, maybe I need to leave town because you're either on the good list or the bad list. And if you're on the bad list, you're not getting work here. So how do we preserve the legacy of the Howard Sims and oh my goodness, Farner, Harold Farners of this world?
I mean, it's a great question. I think that now I'm not over procurement. So,
I know.
Hold on now. Don't
well, no, but it was one of your predecessors played a role in deciding which architects worked in the city and which ones did not, and I know that for a fact.
So, as we said, moving forward, I think it's one of the things that. And this goes back to Chase's question as well. I think it's going to be incredibly important, again, that we are inclusive and intentional about entities that have a history here, that have an understanding of the culture of Detroit, right? Especially, and let's call it what it is. I mean, in the city that, depending on who I talk to, is between 79 and 83% Black. Those people are probably going to be Black, right? And probably need to be. So I think that moving forward, especially as someone that worked in planning and design for most of my career, especially as someone who just left the largest Black-owned architecture firm in the country a couple of weeks ago, I'm very sensitive to ensuring that architects and developers and planners that are Black are included on these bids. So prior to my coming here, I was a project manager and business development for Moody Nolan. Right, my role was to engage and try to get work for a Black-owned architecture firm. And so, I'm intimately aware of some of those challenges. I've sat across rooms where people, question your aptitude or your experience. And so I appreciate, that conversation. And now being in a situation where I can literally and figuratively be on the other side of the table, it lends me a different level of perspective, but also a different level of reach.
And we're so happy about that.
I want to get you to talk a little bit about your housing vision for the city of Detroit, and have you had the opportunity to sort of take stock the current housing infrastructure in the city And, the overwhelming need for home repair, right? Folks are losing wealth because their homes are deteriorating with, no help. And we got the ARPA money coming in. There's a lot of money flowing around, and residents have said through those community engagement sessions with the mayor. And I don't even think this was originally like in his buckets about home repair. Like this was something that was overwhelming. What role does the planning department play in housing our city and making sure that the housing stock stays as beautiful as it could be?
So first of all, the housing stock is very, very attractive. There's some phenomenal bones. There's definitely a Detroit look when it comes to housing.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. It's discernible.
Yeah. And so I do appreciate that. Now, the challenge is that a lot of it is older, right? And systems age. And then it's juxtaposed with the complexity of, there has been a devaluation of some of the housing stock. And one of the things we were talking about in-house is, what do you do for a home that may be valued less than what the repairs need, right? How do you address that, right? So if a home is valued at $20,000 but has a $40,000 repair need, how do you work that financially? If you have, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 homes that need help, and that's a very real number. But if they all need $15,000 worth of help, then what does that look like? How do you tier it, right? Is it purely by, seniors first? Is it purely by income first? Is it some combination of it? So these are active conversations that we're looking at. I think that as far as a vision, one of the things that I'm struck by, again, is the architecture, again, is the strength of the homes, right? They're not slipshod. I mean, these are homes. It was built, right? And so that's something that's abundantly clear. As someone that grew up on the East Coast, it's just reassuring and exciting to see brick clad, real brick, not brick clad. They're different, and it ain't just one width and then slapped on something else. I mean, these are real brick homes and those kinds of things. So it's exciting to see that. But the thing that is despairing is that, because of a variety of reasons, the homes have had some physical challenges. One of the things that we're looking to do, we work intimately with the housing department, is beginning to have this conversation. And as you guys probably all know, even the council is split which way to go as far as the repair of some of these homes. Do you give everyone $5,000? Do you give everyone $50,000? Right? How do you negotiate that? And so that's something we're trying to get a hold of and make some recommendations. We ultimately, and like I said before, somewhere between 85 to 88% of Americans build their wealth through homeownership, right? And so your single biggest opportunity to create a legacy for you and your family is through your home. And if you don't have that, then what? And for a city that's 80% Black, and if they don't have that, then what? And so that's something that we're aggressively looking at, both single family and multifamily. A lot of things that we've heard is that there's a real value on single family occupancy, whether it's single family homeownership or single family renting. But is there a necessity or even a demand to do more multifamily, especially given the economics of household ownership, right? Do we look at that? Are there corridors where that makes a lot more sense? And so those are kind of conversations that we're having actively. And we're looking to see, the best way to negotiate that, because it's not an easy problem. And that's something that I can't just do an academic response to.
Right. One of the challenges is we don't have a housing needs analysis in our city.
Okay.
Nobody knows how much housing we need for whom, but I can say that the city's primary housing development strategy seems to be multifamily housing. Now, you have preservation that crosses the whatever, but multifamily housing, and when you look at multifamily housing, we're talking about studios, 1, maybe 2 bedrooms. And so where do families live? Are we building houses to maintain families is one of the questions I think many of us have. And if not, why not? So I think that there are some complex questions there. It would be just great to see what the vision is, what makes sense, and how do you preserve Detroit? Because Detroit is a single family city.
No, I agree with it. From what I've seen, it does appear to be a single family city. So you've confirmed that for me. So I do appreciate that. If anybody asks me, I'm gonna say Donna said it's a single family city.
Listen, I'll own that. I'll own that.
It's over 70%. So
no. I mean, it appears that way. But the challenge is that as everyone's noted, there are families that will need a place to live, and so if it's a 70% single family population, but the economics of living in an apartment are easier than living in a home, and is there an opportunity to maybe put some people into multifamily.
Sure, if we're building family-sized apartments and family-sized units, I think townhouses could play a significant role in that. Mm-hmm. I think the challenge is when you don't address families at all, and where we've overbuilt small units in our city for a specific demographic that ran away when COVID came. And so we have vacancies in a lot of places that we shouldn't have vacancies. Now, we don't talk about it, but I do believe that to be true. But I want to pivot just a little bit because the city council before you.
Question, so
okay, go on. Ask me a question.
Oh, no, I was going to ask you.
I'm ready.
So, just so I'm clear, so if there was a renewed focus or maybe an increase of 3 and 4 bedroom units, mm-hmm. that would address some of the concerns.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that. There's people who need to move and don't have inventory to move to. And some of them end up leaving the city because they have to, not because they want to. And I think we also have to look at price points. But I want to go back to an earlier conversation. You talked about home ownership and Black wealth, and that's so important to us. And you had this tremendous loss in Black wealth, not just because of overtaxation, but because of all of the foreclosures, tax and mortgage foreclosures, that took us from being a predominantly homeowner city to a predominantly renter city. And the vast majority of the people who lost their homes were Black. And so what we're talking about is loss of Black wealth in Detroit. We're not talking about color of law. We're not talking about the 1960s, 1970s, or even before then. We're talking about 2000, 2005, 2010, 2015, 2021. People are still losing their homes. Mm-hmm. And so, when one of the interesting things, another good decision that City Council did was they decided to put reparations on the ballot. And one of the biggest one of the biggest areas of reparations is around housing. And, for good reason. So my question is, is there any role for planning in that, or do you just wait and see what a reparations committee may come up with?
No, I didn't see that one coming. Okay, so
welcome to Detroit.
That's what is fair. No, I think that the issue of reparations is a very complex one. I think that's something that we would love to have a voice in. I'm not sure what role we can play in specifically, but I do appreciate the fact that this administration and sounds like council is taking it under their repertoire to address, because there's many that haven't, quite frankly, and quite a few that have kicked it down the road. So the fact that it's even come up as a conversation piece, I think, speaks volumes. Now, as far as the ability to push it even further to an actual manifestation of something, especially in the built environment, I think would lead to another level of conversation, inclusive of many people. But it's something a conversation I definitely would welcome.
Just to piggyback on that. So, I mean, we talked about Detroit being a very Black city, right? The architecture, though, much of our housing stock was built before 1970. And I know a lot of Black architects who talk about how we exalt in the architecture that didn't necessarily come from Black people, right? Just the style of architecture and the typologies. And I'm wondering, are there typologies that are from African-American architects that are worthy of a Black city, right? Should we be looking at new design aesthetics for architecture going forward in a city like Detroit?
That's a great question, Chase. I think that there's room for that, right? One of the things, and I said this at the outset, and I firmly believe it, if we can have a consensus by what the residents are looking for, not only from an engagement, on a need standpoint, but from a design standpoint, I think that will yield something that's truly reflective of the culture here, right? And so, a product that I was very proud of back in Houston was row house aesthetic, and we used those, and it reflected a very specific architectural design that's indicative of the South, and we used that for our single family, both affordable rental and ownership. We can do the same thing here, and I think most people will receive it and be excited about it. That's why I wanted to actually pivot to your other point about the townhouses idea, because townhouses have been very contentious in parts of the country. And so I would be interested to know if that's something that would actually sell, because, and I mean from a mindset, not from a financial standpoint, because they make sense financially, they make sense construction wise, but not everybody likes them, especially because they change the aesthetic of a particular neighborhood. So I'm always very careful about introducing townhomes?
Well, townhouses are really popular here, I think, especially when you build them large enough. I live in a townhouse. My daughter lives in a townhouse. My mother lives in not a really townhouse. She lives in a co-op, which is a townhouse. The only thing is I want thicker walls. I don't want to hear my neighbors, but, they're, no, for people who don't like lawn care, don't want to do their snow.
No argument here.
Listen, townhouses can be very popular. For me, it's about size. People like attached garages. There's certain things, and I think it would be really interesting, rather than even me or Chase or Orlando having this conversation, for us to get in the community and talk to people about what their housing preferences would be, because sometimes it's not the fact of a townhouse, it's the design of that townhouse and how well it fits. And we can design things to make them work anywhere. But I look forward to this. I just want to say, because I know we have to wrap it up, and you are so gracious to come here. We're so excited that you're the first. We're your first stop. I want to believe that you're your first stop.
Yes.
And I want to also just honor you. When I found out you were coming to Detroit, everybody I knew in my timeline was like excited. And that never happens when outsiders come to Detroit.
That's so true.
So it really speaks volumes about your track record, that you were not greeted with suspicion, but absolute praise. If people didn't know who you were, they were reassured. So by the time I found out you were here, I was excited. And then when Orlando said you were coming here, I was super excited. So thank you not only for coming on our show, but coming to Detroit and really trying to be the change we need.
I appreciate that. It means more than you know. Whenever you come in from outside, right, especially to a city as proud and as valuable as Detroit, you want to make sure you're putting your best foot forward. But I've also been very cognizant, and something my dad taught me, is that you never want to burn any bridges, because you never know how far your name goes. And so that's something that I've always tried to do, that when I've worked, that you are intentional to treat people with respect and do what you know you have the energy and expertise to do. And so that's something that I hope to deliver and bring to the city of Detroit.
I love it. We like how you're moving and you're talking to all the right folks and meeting with all the right people. We love it. Listen, if you have topics that you want discussed on Authentically Detroit, you can hit us up on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Authentically Detroit, or you can email us at authenticallydetroit@gmail.com. I got a couple of shout outs. Shout out to our newly confirmed Planning and Development Director, Antoine Bryant. Thank you for saying yes. We appreciate you for coming on and for having this really big and expansive conversation with us. It was 3-on-1. And you handled yourself really well. Every interview you do after this will be easier than this one, I promise you. I want to shout out all the amazing organizations who are part of the Detroit Journalism Engagement Cohort. We had a really amazing meeting last Friday, and we're so excited about the potential linkages and partnerships that are going to happen there. Also, check me out, y'all, on the Black Church in Detroit series on American Black Journal on Detroit Public Television, our local PBS affiliate. You can check that out Wednesday and Sundays, Wednesday nights at 7 p.m., Sundays at 9:30 a.m., or you can go to onedetroitpbs.org. I'm contributing on that series, and so it's been fun.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Another Emmy in the making?
I don't know. Maybe I'll get another Emmy. We'll see. And the CRC in Bridge Detroit Analyze and Proposal P event is happening Wednesday, July 28th at 1 p.m. You can register.
What's CRC?
Why don't you tell the folks, Chase? We're both board members.
We are both board members. The Citizens Research Council is the oldest nonpartisan think tank in the state of Michigan. Yes.
Thank you for making sure that we're not caught up in the alphabet soup here. Register at CRCMICH, that's CRCMish.org. That's again, Wednesday, July 28th at 1 p.m. And Chase Cantrell, the Better Buildings, Better Blocks applications are open.
They are.
Yes. So go to bcvdetroit.org/application to apply. When does the application close, Chase Cantrell?
It closes midnight, August 27th.
All right. It closes midnight, August 27th. So be sure to get those applications in. There's always, folks that carry over from the next one who didn't get in the next one, because it's a pretty popular program teaching neighborhood folks how to be developers in their own neighborhood. It's a really amazing program, Chase.
There's your pipeline right there.
There's the pipeline right there. Any other shout outs?
I want to shout out Chase, because I know we're going to be partnering on some stuff in the future. I'm really excited about that.
I'll think about being nice to Chase when we ask him to come back.
Well, you know
he
what?
Says yes or no.
And you know what? I'm going to be
he's one of my best friends. I'm kidding, y'all.
We like to talk about Chase, but we love Chase. But shout out to my vacation. I'm going to be gone for the next 2 weeks.
Oh, yeah.
And so I'm super excited about that.
I need a co-host, Chase Cantrell.
Yes. Hey. So, Chase, you are being formally recruited to
I will
sit
do
in
it.
my
There we
seat.
go.
You have been asked. asked. Remember we said earlier when we asked.
I know. There we go. So.
All right. That does it for this episode of Authentically Detroit. We thank you so much for listening, and we want you to catch the wave.